This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. So, this is a little bit of a video about some of the things maybe that I've kind of figured out around the idea of playing jazz, things that I maybe wish someone had told me a little bit earlier on, and maybe some kind of stuff that we could just chat about that either you care about or you don't, and it's just a thing. Anyway, the intro I was playing there was in the wee small hours of the morning, which a few years ago Keith from 5 Watt World, hi Keith, asked me if I would do a version of, and I've not played any jazz now for quite a while, and the very fleeting moments that I have done it have been for the channel. I think I've done a couple of things. Like I re-looked at Pure Imagination, and I did What a Wonderful World. But I was watching the Dominic Miller on Beato for a little bit, and kind of remembered some of what I liked about doing this sort of stuff. So for me, I started jazz a little bit, I think, too late to actually be really good at it. And this is a thing that you sort of see in a lot of the amazing players like Julian Lage, Gilad Hexelman, Jonathan Kreisberg, and all of the greats pretty much for jazz tended to learn it very, very early on. So if you don't get amazing at it, don't shoot yourself. Shoot yourself, that's what I meant to say. Don't beat yourself up, is what I meant to say, a little bit less extreme. Because I think a lot of this stuff is kind of baked into people doing it very young. Matteo Mancuso as well, I think, grew up sort of playing jazz with his dad in duo form. But if you do have a kid and you want to get them into this jazz thing, start them off on it early, I guess. For me, I started off playing piano at age 5. At that time, I think once you got to grade 5 on piano, there were jazz grades and stuff, which might have been useful or might not, because I'm not sure exactly how much you get out of just learning jazz from notes either. But, so I got interested in jazz around the age of 16, 17. John Petrucci was what I was really into at the time, and he talked about some of this jazz stuff. He went to Berkeley, and I think he mentioned players like George Benson and Pat Metheny, which for me were kind of my gateways in. Now, the issue with that for me is that Pat Metheny and George Benson sort of strayed away from the jazz canon stuff and the kind of standards quite early on. Like the stuff that I could find of Pat Metheny was pretty much all originals. George Benson kind of went down a bit of a poppy route. So I think that's why it took me a while to get back to what I probably should have done earlier on, and maybe if I had a teacher in this stuff it would have made a difference. I eventually did find many years later a Jonathan Kreisberg interview where he said that basically he, I think, flunked an audition to get into a college or university or whatever, and he had a teacher at the time. That teacher said to him, learn a new tune every single week for the year, and then the next time he auditioned, whatever he did during that time worked. So that was the thing that for me, as bad as I still am at this thing, made me feel a bit more connected to what jazz actually is. Instead of just learning lots of kind of jazz licks and kind of picking up Hal Leonard books with like the kind of building blocks of these jazz licks and all of this sort of stuff, actually what I found way more useful and allowed me to actually enjoy playing the stuff way more was that I took a tune a week for, well, as long as I did it. So before any of the gear stuff on YouTube, you'll see that I used to do a video on a Wednesday which was like an exploratory bit of playing over whatever tune I was learning, and then on the Sunday I would actually upload a performance of it, of me trying to play it. That was what I was using YouTube for quite a while, maybe a couple of years, where literally I would just on a Wednesday, I'd just pick a tune basically on Monday, and it might be one that I saw in a list of tunes that you might know, or it might be one that I got a recommendation of, or it might be a tune that I saw Jonathan Kreisberg playing or Gilad Hexelman, but a jazz standard mostly. And then basically you start listening to the tune early in the week. So Monday might just be a case of trying to figure out what version you kind of like the sound of, whether it's something by Chet Baker, Peggy Lee, Frank Sinatra, all of that sort of stuff. So find a version that you can listen to and enjoy. Then I would kind of trying to figure out what the melody was doing, so that I had like a framework of the melody so that I could sing the thing back. And then I would kind of figure out what the chords were. So this might be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then I would start to try and put together my own kind of thing, like put in the melody, which by the time I get to doing this, the melody I can just play without thinking about it. And then you can hang the chords off it, some interesting chords. And by the end of the week, what you hopefully have is a good memory of the tune and are able to play like a chord melody version of it. And hopefully, at some point, you might be able to solo over it. But what I found actually playing jazz a little bit out live was that I had kind of focused and over-focused on the years prior to this idea of being able to, do whatever solo amazingly well, which I never got to anyway. But what you really find when you're playing jazz out live is that your solo is like whatever percentage of a much larger thing, unless you're, of course, Julian Large or Jonathan Kreisberg. But if you're actually playing out in kind of little clubs or little get-togethers and jams, you're probably over-focusing on the time that you get to take a solo, because most of the time you will be comping, or this is a thing that I did actually find really useful. There'll be times when it might be appropriate for you to do your little chord melody version that you figured out. So if there was tunes that I would play the intro for, what I would normally do is kind of like play like a relaxed, chilled version of it, something like what maybe a piano might do, whatever the tune is. Hopefully I could play some sort of chord melody version, because I've been doing this for long enough. I think maybe 3 years of kind of sitting down and figuring out this stuff. So that was the most useful piece of advice that I ever got for jazz, was from that Jonathan Kreisberg interview, where he said literally just pick a song a week. And instead of it really did kind of change the whole focus of the whole kind of jazz thing for me, because prior to that I didn't really know what I should be doing, and this actually made me feel a bit more connected to what jazz should or could be. So I think that's a good piece of advice, and you can find lots of versions of jazz tunes all over the place. Other things I really like to listen to are like piano players' versions of stuff. So Keith Jarrett, for example, I really like listening to. The other thing is that a lot of this stuff takes time, and so that is why focusing on one song per week can really help you to at least the time that you do have, focus it on this one tune, so that hopefully by the end of the week it's kind of a little bit imprinted in your brain. And when I used to do this a lot, I would kind of just hear the song quite a lot of the time, and that really does help as well to solve the issue of, and this is a question I used to get quite a bit, like how do you remember the changes and how do you remember these things? Well, actually, if you do quite a lot of this stuff like on a song by song basis, the thing kind of just starts to float in your subconscious. So like I hadn't played that in the wee small hours of the morning since I borrowed Tony from up the road's Greco. Looking at my bounces, that's the last time I played it, which was in 2022 in June. So it does sort of sit in your head somewhere in your memory, and I kind of gave it like a little bit of a 10-minute kind of swooshing over and thinking, right, what would I do here? Of course, like the soloing over it, fluency kind of for me has gone away, and I was never like an amazing jazz player anyway, but the bit that I think is quite cool to be able to do is like the chord melody stuff up front, and that was what Dominic Miller kind of reminded me of. And that's the other thing, don't hyper focus necessarily on jazz. Like you could totally just create your own versions of songs that are out there, like Dominic Miller was playing All By Myself by Celine Dion and things like that. And I thought, yeah, that is actually a pretty cool thing, like to be able to take a piece of music that you really like. It doesn't have to be jazz, but like this jazz framework part of it, where in jazz we are quite, I'm not part of jazz obviously, but people are very used to taking a melody, figuring out how to play chords and melody at the same time, and then get that out in that way. So you're going to need time. I think focus on a song per week, or like separate your projects or focus into a song. On my Patreon, I do have tabs and backing tracks for a load of this stuff, and I think I'm going to try and keep building that over time. There are hundreds of jazz tunes that I have done this with, but it was before I started doing the Patreon thing, so potentially I could keep growing that library. On TrueFire as well, there's Martin Taylor and Tim Lurch, who I think are really good and sort of have a similar approach. I think I did watch Tim Lurch a fair amount starting on this YouTube thing, and thought like that's a guy that clearly knows what he's doing, and also is doing this same sort of approach of playing the melody and then figuring out chords and hanging them together in that way. So yeah, TrueFire, you could use the code JNC40 or JNC100. JNC40 will get you 40% off any of their courses. JNC100 will get you $100 off an all-access pass if you wanted to check out like Martin Taylor, Tim Lurch, Tim Miller, etc. But yeah, that for me was the single best piece of advice that I got for jazz. Learn a jazz tune a week. It doesn't really matter what it is, just something that you can bear to listen to for a week and want to be able to play. And that got me away from this kind of obsessiveness around like, well, I need to be able to play giant steps or whatever, because I've never been on a gig where giant steps was called, so that would have been wasted time. Let me know your favourite jazz tips if you've got any. Do you want to see me do more jazz on the channel? Do you give a shit at all? Probably not. Thank you for stopping by. I'm going to go spend some time with the family. Hope you enjoyed that, Keith. Cheers.